Two words which are very extensively and commonly used in the education space are teaching and learning. There's often some kind of a confusion in understanding the connotations, the implications of these two words. And ordinarily, we tend to create what is called a delusional overlap between the two terms, which really means we tend to sort of confuse one with another. It's very important to understand that teaching and learning are, of course, essential ingredients of any educational structure of an institution, but they inform almost like the pillars of educational superstructure. But in terms of the implications and in terms of the dynamics of the two phrases, they're vastly different. And it's extremely important for us to understand the distinction between the two for a much better delivery system, for a much better understanding of the concepts, so that much better learning can happen, which indeed is the main objective of any education institution. While the teaching is a process which takes place within the school premises, the larger focus has to be really on the concept of learning, which really means that our education system has to become more student-centric, contrary to the current practices which has been on for the last several years, where we've been focusing more on the teacher-centric dynamics of education system. The learning and teaching by themselves, as mentioned earlier, are an integral part of education space, but two different set of people are involved in the process. Teaching is done by a teacher who's an experienced person, highly educated, been there for the last 7 years, and the learning happens by a child who's just new, fresh, eager to imbibe in a lot of new experiences, new knowledge, new practices. So that's the first basic difference. The second difference is in the dynamics of the process which is involved. One is in the form of a delivery, another in the form of an assimilation. Assimilation and has to be further tested by what is called process of evaluation and assessment. Now, if we take a closer look at the two concepts, two phenomena, the teaching and the learning, one would notice that the teaching which has been happening in large number of schools in our country, especially in the non-metro cities, which constitutes of a much larger number, is entirely based upon what is called a didactic or a rote learning system. It's a teaching is really structured on the basis of cramming, memorizing concepts, scoring marks in the examination, doing well in the competitive examination. And that really qualifies to be created, to be put in the category of learning. A typical teaching activity that happens in a school is that we have several classrooms. Every class has got something about 30, 40 children with desks and tables, and a huge table in one end next to the blackboard. The teacher enters the class, children get up, they exchange pleasantries of good morning and good afternoon, whatever. Attendance is taken and the process of teaching then begins. Now, typically about 40 minutes of period that usually is devoted to a particular subject. It's very easy to observe that almost 25 to 30% or maybe 25 to 30 minutes out of 40 minutes are spent by a teacher facing the blackboard, where he or she takes down copious notes, which largely are picked out from the book on the subject. And it would not be an exaggeration to state that it's a kind of a copy-paste of what is written in the book. Children are sitting in the classroom, but we do not know, because the teacher is not visually connected with him, whether the classroom and the students are fully attentive to what is being written there. Much more so in the present situation, when everything which is being written on the blackboard is accessible to the children on the click of a mouse. So in a large number of cases, the span of attention and actual attention really has been reduced more or less nil. So what is it that happens in a classroom? Is that what is called teaching? Or is there something much more to the concept of teaching? I think this is where we need to, the educationists and the people who are stakeholders in the entire process of education system, need to sit back and reflect whether we need to revisit the entire concept of teaching. Is teaching only telling? Is teaching only writing on the blackboard? Or maybe using the smart board, which is the current practice these days? Or is teaching much more than that? Does this teaching create creative thinking? Does it encourage critical concepts? Does it also encourage a much deeper concept clarity amongst the students? Or more importantly, does it equip the children with adequate skills for them to face different challenges of life? I think the answer to this question, to be an affirmative, is going to be a major challenge. Now, when you look at the other side of the picture, which is the learning, which essentially is a phenomena which is indeed the main objective of an education system. Children come to learn, and the learning does not really is not necessarily limited only to what they receive in a classroom. Learning happens across the board in several engagements, including sports, in classrooms, in peer group learning, in being mentored, in participating in several other activities. So the learning is infused into their system, into the cerebral system or into the intellectual system by several forces, several phenomena that are happening in a school system. And I think that's where the main focus of an education system must lie. The learning also happens by encouraging students to be creative, to try things on their own, to have hands-on experiences. That's why we now started talking more and more about the project-based learning, the active learning. Like typically they say, if you tell me, I forget, but if you make me do it, I learn. And that becomes an integral part of my thought process. That's what really learning is. Learning also happens in a very strong measure by a process of observation. If you observe the phenomena around you, if you keep your awareness level at a very high level, you understand why things are happening and start questioning them. And then experience them at your own level. That also becomes a very important part of learning. And rightly said, if one is exposed to this particular syndrome, this particular style of learning, then it becomes a habit and becomes a lifelong kind of an occupation. And learning really indeed must become a lifelong occupation. Nothing in this world can give you much greater happiness than learning. And if that can become part of your life's ambition, life's occupation, I think everything else falls into insignificance. The seeds of this phenomena, these seeds of this kind of learning must necessarily be sown at the school level. I think therefore it's extremely important for everyone who's connected with the educational space, who is a strong stakeholder, which is the society, the education superstructure, schools, parents, teachers, students, all must sit down, work together, and make sure that teaching is reoriented restructured to make sure the learning becomes an enjoyable and a lifelong experience. Thank you.